Chapter 44. There are some men who, living with the one object of enriching themselves no matter by what means, being perfectly conscious of the baseness and rascality of the means which they will use every day towards that end, affect, nevertheless, even to themselves, a high tone of moral rectitude, and shake their heads and sigh over the depravity of the world. Some of the craftiest scoundrels that ever walked this earth, or rather, for walking implies at least an erect position and the bearing of a man. Some of the craftiest scoundrels that ever crawled and crept through life by its dirtiest and narrowest ways will gravely jot down in their diaries the events of every day, and keep a regular debtor and creditor account with heaven, which shall always show a floating balance in their own favour. Ralph Nickleby was not a man of that stamp. Stern, unyielding, dogged, and impenetrable, Ralph cared for nothing in life or beyond it save the gratification of two passions: avarice, the first and predominant appetite of his nature, and hatred, the second. Affecting to consider himself but a type of all humanity, he was at little pains to conceal his true character from the world in general, and in his own heart he exulted over and cherished every bad design as it had birth. The only scriptural admonition that Ralph Nickleby heeded was "Know thyself," and he knew himself well, and choosing to imagine that all mankind were cast in the same mould, hated them. For though no man hates himself, the coldest among us have too much self-love for that. Yet most men unconsciously judge the world from themselves, and it will be very generally found that those who sneer habitually at human nature and affect to despise it are among its worst and least pleasant samples. But the present business of these advantages is with Ralph himself, who stood regarding Newman Noggs with a heavy frown, while that worthy took off his fingerless gloves, and spreading them carefully on the palm of his left hand and flattening them with his right to take the creases out, proceeded to roll them up with an absent air, as if he were utterly disregarding of all things else in the deep interest of the ceremonial. "Gone out of town?" said Ralph slowly. "A mistake of yours. Go back again." "No mistake," returned Newman. "Not even going. Gone." He has gone? Has he turned girl or baby?" muttered Ralph with a fretful gesture. "I don't know," said Newman. "All I know is that he's gone." The repetition of the word "gone" seemed to afford Newman Noggs inexpressible delight, in proportion as it annoyed Ralph Nickleby. He uttered the word with a full round emphasis, dwelling upon it as long as he decently could. "Gone!" And when he could hold it out no longer without attracting observation, stood gasping it to himself, as if even that were a satisfaction. "And where has he gone?" said Ralph. "France," replied Newman. "Danger of another attack of erysipelas, a worked attack in the head, so the doctors ordered him off, and he's gone." "And Lord Frederick?" began Ralph. "Oh, he's gone too," replied Newman. "And he carries his drubbing with him, does he?" said Ralph, turning away. pockets his bruises, and sneaks off without the retaliation of a word or seeking the smallest reparation. He's too ill, said Newman. Too ill? Replied Ralph. Why, I should have had my revenge if I were dying. In that case I would be only the more determined to have it, and have it without delay. I mean, if I were he. But he's too ill, poor Sir Mulberry. Too ill. Uttering these words with supreme contempt and great irritation of manner, Ralph signed hastily to Newman to leave the room, and throwing himself into his chair, beat his foot impatiently upon the ground. There is some spell about that boy, said Ralph, grinding his teeth. Circumstances conspire to help him. Talk of fortune's favour. What is even money to such devil's luck as that? He thrust his hands impatiently into his pockets, but notwithstanding his previous reflection, there was some consolation there. For his face relaxed a little, and although there was still a deep frown upon the contracted brow, it was one of calculation, not of disappointment. This hawk will come back, however, muttered Ralph, and if I know the man, and I should know him by this time, his wrath will have lost nothing of its violence, or, in the meanwhile, obliged to live in retirement, to the monotony of a sick room, to a man of his habits, no life, no drink, no play, nothing that he likes and lives by. Oh, he's not likely to forget his obligations to the cause of all this. Few men would, but he of all others, oh, no, no. He smiled and shook his head, and resting his chin upon his hand, fell musing and smiled again. After a time he rose and rang the bell. That Mr. Squirrels, has he been here? Said Ralph. He was here last night. I left him here when I went home, returned Newman. I know that, fool, said Ralph irascibly. Has he been here since? Was he here this morning? No, bawled Newman in a very loud key. If he comes while I'm out, he's pretty sure to be here by 9 tonight. Let him wait. And if there's another man with him, as there will be perhaps, said Ralph, checking himself, let him wait too. Let 'em both wait, said Newman. Aye, replied Ralph, turning upon him with an angry look. Help me on with this coat, and don't repeat after me like a croaking parrot. I wish I was a parrot, said Newman sulkily. I wish you were, rejoined Ralph, drawing his coat on. I'd have wrung your neck long ago. Newman returned no answer to this compliment, but looked over Ralph's shoulder for an instant. He was just adjusting the collar of the coat, as if he was strongly disposed to tweak him by the nose. Meeting Ralph's eye, however, he suddenly recoiled his wandering fingers, and rubbed his own red nose with a vehemence quite astonishing. Bestowing no further notice upon his eccentric follower than a threatening look and an admonition to be careful and make no mistake, Ralph took his hat and gloves and walked out. He appeared to have a very extraordinary and miscellaneous number of calls to make, some at great rich houses, some at small poor houses, but all with the same object: money. It was evening before a long round of such visits, interrupted only by a scanty dinner at an eating-house, terminated at Pimlico, and Ralph walked along St. James's Park on his way home. There were some deep schemes in his head, as the puckered brow and firmly set mouth would have abundantly testified, even if they had been unaccompanied by a complete indifference to, or unconsciousness of the objects around him. So complete was his abstraction, however, that Ralph, usually as quick-sighted as any man, did not observe that he was followed by a shambling figure, which at one time stole behind him with noiseless footsteps, at another crept a few paces before him, and at another glided along by his side, at all times regarding him with an eye so keen and a look so eager and attentive that it was more like the expression of an intrusive face in some powerful picture or strongly marked dream than the scrutiny even of a most interested and anxious observer. The sky had been lowering and dark for some time, and the commencement of a violent storm of rain drove Ralph for shelter to a tree. He was leaning against it with folded arms, still buried in thought, when, happening to raise his eyes, he suddenly met those of a man, the very man who, creeping round the trunk, peered into his face with a searching look. There was something in the moneylender's expression at that moment which the man appeared to remember well, for it decided him, and stepping close up to Ralph, he pronounced his name. Astonished for the moment, Ralph fell back a couple of paces and surveyed him from head to foot. A spare, dark, withered man, of about his own age, with a stooping body and a very sinister face, rendered more ill-favoured by hollow brows and hungry cheeks, deeply sunburned. His thick black eyebrows, blacker in contrast with the perfect whiteness of his hair, roughly cloaked in perfect whiteness and shabby garments of a strange and uncouth make, and having about him an indefinable manner of depression and degradation. This, for an indefinable moment, Ralph beheld. But he looked again, and the face and the person seemed to subside and soften into lineaments that were familiar, until at last they resolved themselves, as if by some strange optical illusion, into one of those of whom he had known for many years. He was gradually remembering the face which had been forgotten and lost sight of for many, many decades. The man saw that the recognition was mutual, and beckoning to Ralph to take his former place under the tree, and not to stand in the falling rain, of which in his first surprise he had been quite regardless, addressed himself in a hoarse, faint tone. You would hardly have known me from my voice, I suppose, Mr. Nickleby, he said. No, returned Ralph, bending a severe look upon him, though there is something in that I remember now. There is little in me that you can call to mind as having been there 8 years ago, I dare say, observed the other. Quite enough, said Ralph, carelessly, averting his face. More than enough. If I had remained in doubt about you, Mr. Nickleby, said the other, this reception and your manner would have decided me very soon. Do you expect any other? Asked Ralph sharply. No, said the man. You were right, retorted Ralph, and as you feel no surprise, need express none. Mr. Nickleby, said the man, bluntly, after a long pause, during which he had seemed to struggle with an inclination to answer him by some reproach. Will you bear a few words that I have to say? I am obliged to wait here till the rain holds back a little, said Ralph, looking round. If you talk, sir, I shall not put my fingers in my ears, though your talking may have exactly the same effect as if I did. I was once in your confidence, said his companion. Ralph looked round and smiled involuntarily. Well, said the other, as much as your confidence you would ever dare let anybody know. Ah, rejoined Ralph, folding his arms, that's another thing, quite another thing. Don't let's play upon words, Mr. Nickleby. In the name of humanity. Oh, what? Said Ralph. Of humanity, replied the other sternly. I am hungry and in want. If the change that you see in me after so many years, see it, and must see it, because it's come upon me by slow and hard degrees, I see it and know it well. If that will not move you to pity, let the knowledge that bread, not the daily bread of the Lord's Prayer, which is offered up in cities like this, and is understood to include half the luxuries of the world for the rich and just as much coarse food as will support the life of the poor. Not that, but bread, perhaps, a crust of dirty, dry, hard bread, that's beyond my reach today. But it's not beyond yours. Let that have some weight with you, if nothing else does. If this is the usual form in which you beg, sir, said Ralph, you have studied your part well, but if you will take advice from one who knows something of the world and its ways, I should recommend a lower tone, or you stand a fair chance of being starved in good earnest. As he said this, Ralph clenched his left wrist tightly with his right hand, and inclining his head a little to one side and dropping his chin upon his breast, looked at the man who had addressed him with a frowning, sullen space. The very picture of a man whom nothing could move or soften. Yesterday was my first day in London, said the old man, glancing at his travel-stained dress and worn shoes. It would have been better for you, I think, if it had been your last, replied Ralph. I have been seeking you these 2 days, where I thought you were most likely to be found, resumed the other humbly, and I met you here last, when I had almost given up the hope of encountering you, Mr. Nickleby. He seemed to wait for some reply, but Ralph, giving him none, he continued, I am a most miserable and wretched outcast, nearly 60 years old, and as destitute and helpless as a child. I'm 60 years old too, replied Ralph, and am neither destitute or helpless. Work! Don't make the fine play-acting speculation about bread. Earn it! How? Cried the other man. How? Show me the means. Will you give them to me or not? I did once, replied Ralph composedly. You scarcely needed to ask whether I will again. It's 20 years ago or more, said the man in a suppressed voice, since you and I fell out. You remember that? I claimed a share in the profits of some business I brought to you, and as I persisted, you arrested me for an old advance of £10 odd shillings, including interest, at 50%. I remember something of it, replied Ralph carelessly. What then? That didn't part us, said the man. I made submission, being on the right side of the bolts and bars, and as you were not the made man that you are now, you were glad enough to take back a clerk who wasn't over nice and who knew something of the trade you drove. You begged and prayed that I took you on, consented Ralph. That was kind of me. Perhaps I did want you. I forget. I should think I did, or you would have begged in vain. You were helpful, not too honest, not too delicate, not too nice of hand or heart, but useful. Useful indeed, said the man. Come, you had pinched and ground me down for years before that, but I had served you faithfully through the years, in spite of all your dog's usage. I did, didn't I? Ralph made no reply. Didn't I? Said the man again. You've had your wages, rejoined Ralph, and you've done your work. We stand on equal ground so far, and could both cry quits. Then, but not afterwards, said the other. Not afterwards, certainly. Not even then, replied Ralph. Oh, don't worry about the money, said the man eagerly. That's not what I'm worried about. Mark that. I didn't forget that old score, trust me, partly in remembrance of that and partly in the hope of making more money some day by the scheme. I took advantage of my position about you and possessed myself of a hold upon you, which would give you'd give half of all the world you have to know, and never knew but except through me. I left you? Long after that time? Remember, and for some poor trickery that came within the law, but was nothing to do with money lenders. I am what you see me now. What help and assistance will you give me? What bribe to speak out, nor not to speak out plainly? My expectations are not monstrous, but I must live, and to live I must eat and drink. Money is on your side, and pain and weakness are on the other. Well, is that all? Said Ralph, still eyeing his companion with a steady look and moving nothing but his lips. It depends upon you, Mr. Nickleby, whether that's all or not, was the rejoinder. Why then, harkye, Mr. I don't know the name by which I am to call you, said Ralph. By my old one, if you like. Well, harkye then, Mr. Brooker, said Ralph, in his harshest accents. Don't expect to draw another speech from me. Harkye, sir, I know you of old for a ready scoundrel, that you never had a stout heart, and hard work, and maybe chains upon those legs of yours, and shorter food than when I pinched and ground you, has blunted your wits, or you wouldn't have come with such a tale to me. You have a hold upon me? Oh, keep it, or publish it to the world if you like. I can't do that, interposed Brooker. That wouldn't serve me. Wouldn't it? Said Ralph. It'll serve you as much as bringing it to me, I promise you. To be plain with you, I am a careful man, and know my own affairs thoroughly. I know the world, and the world knows me. Whatever you have gleaned or heard or seen, nothing would surprise the world unless, indeed, it were redounded to my credit or honour, and then it would scout you for a liar. Quite the contrary. I am reviled and threatened every day by one man and another, said Ralph, but things roll on just the same, and I don't grow poorer. I neither revile nor threaten, said the man. I can tell you of what I've lost by my act, what I can only restore, and what, if I die without restraining, dies with me, and never can be regained. I tell you my money pretty accurately, and generally keep it in my own custody, said Ralph. I look sharply after most men that I deal with, and most of all I look sharply after you. You are welcome to all you have kept from me. Are those of your own name dear to you? Said the man emphatically. If they are. They are not, returned Ralph, exasperated at this perseverance, and the thought of Nicholas which the last question awakened. They are not. If you were a common beggar, I might have thrown a sixpence to you in remembrance of the clever knave you used to be. But since you try to palm these stale tricks upon me, or one you might have known better before, I'll not part with a halfpenny, nor would I save you from rotting. And remember this, scape gallows, said Ralph, menacing him with his hand. If we meet again, and you so much as notice me by a begging gesture, you shall see the inside of a jail cell once again, and pretty soon, and tighten this hold upon me in intervals of hard labour that vagabonds are put to. That's my answer to your trash. Take it. With a disdainful scowl at the object of his anger, who met his eye but uttered not a word, Ralph walked out at his usual pace, without manifesting the slightest curiosity to see what became of his late companion, or indeed once looking behind him. The man remained on the same spot, with his eyes fixed upon his retreating figure until it was lost to view, and then, drawing his arms about his chest, as if the damp and lack of food stuck coldly into him, lingered with slouching steps by the wayside, and begged of those who passed along. Ralph, in no wise moved by what had lately passed, further than that he had already expressed himself, walked deliberately on, and turning out of the park and leaving Golden Square on his right, took his way through some streets to the West End, until he arrived in the particular street in which stood the residence of Madame Mantalini. The name of that lady no longer appeared on the flaming door plate, but that of Miss Nagg had been substituted in its stead. However, the bonnets and dresses were still there, dimly visible in the first-floor windows by the decaying light of a summer's evening, and, expecting no ostensible alteration in the proprietorship, the establishment wore its old appearance. "Ha!" muttered Ralph, drawing his hand across his mouth with a connoisseur-like air, and surveying the house from top to bottom. "These people look very well. They can't last long, but if I know they're going in good time, I am safe, and a fair profit too. I must keep them closely in view. That's all." So, nodding his head very complacently, Ralph was leaving the spot when his quick ear heard the sound of a confused noise, a hubbub of voices, mingled with a great many people running up and down stairs in the very house which had been the subject of his scrutiny. And while he was hesitating whether to knock at the door or listen at the keyhole a little longer, a female servant of Madame Mantalini's, whom he had often seen before, opened it abruptly and bounded out, with her blue cap ribbons streaming in the air. "Hallo there, stop!" cried Ralph. "What's the matter? Here am I. Didn't you hear me knock?"
"Oh, Mr. Nickleby, sir," said the girl. "Oh, go up, for the love of gracious. Master's done it again."
"Done what?" said Ralph tartly. "What do you mean?"
"I know he would be driv to it," cried the girl. "I said so all day long."
"Come here, you silly wench," said Ralph, catching her by the wrist. "Don't carry family matters to the neighbours, destroying the credit of the establishment. Come here, do you hear me, girl?" Without any further expostulation, he led, or rather pulled, the frightened handmaid into the house and shut the door, then, bidding her walk upstairs before him, followed without ceremony. Guided by the noise of a great many voices, all taken together, and passing the girl in his impatience before they had ascended many steps, Ralph quickly reached the private sitting-room, where he was rather amazed by the confused and inexplicable scene in which he suddenly found himself. There were all the young lady workers, some with bonnets and some without, in various attitudes expressive of alarm and consternation, some gathered around Madame Mantalini, who was in tears upon one chair, and others around Miss Nagg, who was in the opposition tiers upon another, and others round Mr. Mantalini, who was perhaps the most striking figure in the whole group, for Mr. Mantalini's legs were extended at full length upon the floor, and his head and shoulders were supported by a very tall footman, who didn't seem to know what to do with them. And Mr. Mantalini's eyes were closed, and his face was pale, and his hair was comparatively straight, and his whiskers and moustache were limp, and his teeth were clenched, and he had a little bottle in his right hand and a little teaspoon in his left, and his hands, arms, legs, and shoulders were all stiff and powerless. And yet Madame Mantalini was not weeping over the body, but was scolding violently upon her chair, and all this amidst a clamour of tongues perfectly deafening, which really appeared to have driven the unfortunate footman to the utmost verge of distraction. "What is the matter here?" said Ralph, pressing forward. And at this inquiry the clamour increased 20-fold, and as astounding a string of such shrill contradictions were heard. "He's poisoned himself. I knew he'd do it. No, he hasn't. Send for the doctor. Don't. He's dying. No, he ain't. He's only pretending," with various other cries, pouring forth with bewildered volubility until Madame Mantalini was seen to address herself to Ralph, when female curiosity to know what she would say prevailed, and as if by general consent a dead silence, unbroken by a single whisper, instantaneously succeeded. "Mr. Nickleby," said Madame Mantalini, "by what chance came you here?" Here a gurgling voice was heard to ejaculate as part of the wanderings of a sick man the words, "Damnation, sweetness," but nobody heeded them except the footman, who, being startled to hear such awful tones proceeding as it were from between his very fingers, dropped his master's head upon the floor with a very pretty loud crash, and then, without an effort to lift it up, gazed upon the bystanders as if he'd done something really rather clever than otherwise. "I will, however," continued Madame Mantalini, drying her eyes and speaking with great indignation, "say before you, Mr. Nickleby, and before everybody here for the first time, once for all, that I will never supply that man's extravagances and viciousnesses again. I have been a dupe and a fool long enough. In future he shall support himself if he can, and then he may have what money he pleases upon and bestow it upon whom he pleases and how he pleases. But it shall not be mine, and therefore you had better pause before you trust him further." Thereupon Madame Mantalini, quite unmoved by some more pathetic lamentations on the part of her husband, that the apothecary had not mixed the prussic acid long enough, and that he must take another bottle or two to finish the work he had in mind, he entered then into a catalogue of that amiable gentleman's gallantries, deceptions, extravagances, and infidelities, especially the last, winding up with a protest against being supposed to entertain the smallest remnant of regard for him, and adducing in proof of the altered state of her affections the circumstance of his having poisoned himself in private no less than 6 times within the last fortnight, and her not having once interfered by word or deed to save his life. "And I must insist upon being separated and left to myself," said Madame Mantalini, sobbing. "If he dares refuse me a separation, I'll have one in law. I can, and I hope this will be a warning to all girls who have seen this disgraceful exhibition." Miss Nagg, who was unquestionably the oldest girl in the company, said with great solemnity that it would certainly be a warning to her, and so did the young ladies generally, with the exception of 1 or 2 who appeared to entertain doubts as to whether such whiskers could go wrong. "Why do you say all this before so many listeners?" said Ralph in a low voice. "And you know you are not in earnest." "I am in earnest," replied Madame Mantalini aloud, and retreating towards Miss Nagg. "Well, consider," reasoned Ralph, who had a great interest in the matter. "It would be well to reflect. A married woman has no property of her own. It all belongs to her husband." "I am quite aware of that," retorted Madame Mantalini, tossing her head, "and I have none. The business, the stock, the house, everything in it, all belong now to Miss Nagg." "That is quite true, Madame Mantalini," said Miss Nagg, with whom her late employer had secretly come to an amicable understanding on this point. "Very true, indeed, Madame Mantalini." "Very true. And I was never more glad in all my life that I had the strength of mind to resist matrimonial offers, no matter how advantageous, than I am when I think of my present position as compared to your most unfortunate and most undeserved one, Madame Mantalini." "Damn it!" cried Mr. Mantalini, thrusting his head towards his wife. "Will it not slap and pinch the envious dowager? He dares to reflect upon his own delicious—" "Damn it!" cried Mr. Mantalini. But the day of Mr. Mantalini's blandishments had departed. "Miss Nagg, sir," said his wife, "is my particular friend, and although Mr. Mantalini leered till his eyes seemed in danger of never coming back to their right position again, Madame Mantalini showed no sign of softening. To do the excellent Miss Nagg justice, she had been mainly instrumental in bringing this altered state of things about, for finding by daily experience that there was no chance whatever of the business thriving or even continuing to exist while Mr. Mantalini had any hand or interest in its well-doing, she had assiduously supplied herself to the investigation of some little matters connected with that gentleman's private character, which she had so well elucidated and artfully imparted to Madame Mantalini as to open her eyes more effectively than the closest and most philosophical reasoning could have done in a series of years. To which end the accidental discovery by Miss Nagg of some tender correspondence in which Madame Mantalini was described as old and debauched had most preliminary cultivated. However, notwithstanding her firmness, Madame Mantalini wept very piteously, and as she leant upon Miss Nagg and signed towards the door, that young lady and all the other young ladies, with sympathizing faces, proceeded to bear her out. "Nickleby," said Mr. Mantalini in tears, "you have been a witness of this damnation cruelty on the part of the damnedest enslaver and captivator that ever there was. Oh, damnation! I forgive the woman." "Forgive!" repeated Madame Mantalini angrily.
I do forgive her, Nickleby, said Mr. Mantalini. You will blame me, the world will blame me, the women will blame me, everybody will laugh and scoff and smile and grin damnably. They will say, she had a blessing. She did not know it. He was too weak. He was too good. He was a demmed fine fellow, but he loved too strong. He couldn't bear her to be cross and called him wicked names. It was of a damned case that ever there was. Never, never, never a damneder. But I forgive her.
With this affecting speech, Mr. Mantalini fell down again very flat, and lay to all appearance without sense or motion, until all the females had left the room, when he came cautiously into a sitting posture, and confronted Ralph with a very blank face, and the little bottle still in one hand and the teaspoon in the other. "You may put away all your fooleries now, and live by your wits again," said Ralph, coolly putting on his hat.
"Damn it, Nickleby, you're not serious?"
"I seldom joke," said Ralph. "Good night."
No, Nickleby," said Mantalini. No, I am wrong, perhaps."
"I may be wrong," rejoined Ralph. "I hope so. You should know best. Good night." Affecting not to hear his entreaties that he would stay and advise him, Ralph left the crestfallen Mr. Mantalini to his meditations, and left the house quietly. "Oh," he said, "sets the wind that way so soon? Half knave and half fool, and detected in both characters? I say your day is nearly over, sir." As he said this, he made some memorandum in his pocket-book in which Mr. Mantalini's name figured conspicuously, and finding by his watch that it was between 9 and 10 o'clock, made all speed home. "Are they here?" was the first question he asked of Newman. Newman nodded. "They've been here for half an hour." "Two of them? One fat, sleek man?" "Aye," said Newman. "In your room now." "Good," rejoined Ralph. "Get me a coach."
"A coach? What do you want? What do you want a coach for? Where are you going?"
stammered Newman. Ralph angrily repeated his orders, and Noggs, who might as well have been excused for wondering at such an unusual and extraordinary circumstance, for he had never seen Ralph in a coach in his life, departed on his errand, and presently returned with the conveyance. Into it went Mr. Squeers and Ralph and the third man, whom Newman Noggs had never seen. Newman stood on the doorstep to see them off, not troubling himself to wonder whether or why, what business they were doing, until he chanced by mere accident to hear Ralph name the address whither the coachman was to drive. Quick as lightning, and in a state of the most extreme wonder, Newman darted into his little office for his hat, and limped after the coach as if the intention was to get up on the back. But in this design he was balked, for it had too much a start of him, and soon was helplessly ahead, leaving him gasping in the street. "I don't know, though," said Noggs, stopping for breath, "any good that I could have done by going. He would have seen me if he had. Drive there? What can become of this? If I had only known it yesterday, I could have... Trent one... Oh, I couldn't have helped." His reflections were interrupted by a grey-haired man of very remarkable, though far from prepossessing appearance, who, coming healthily towards him, solicited relief. Newman, still cogitating deeply, turned away, but the man followed him and pressed upon him with such a tale of misery that Newman, who might have been considered a hopeless person to beg from, and who had little enough to give, looked into his hat for some halfpence, which he usually had screwed up in the corner of his pocket handkerchief. While he was busily untwisting the knot with his teeth, the man said something which attracted his attention, whatever that was, and it led to something else. In the end, he and Newman walked side by side, the strange man talking earnestly, and Newman listening.